Part 14. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 131. In the boudoir, two mature beauties were sitting sideways on the soft couch. The Queen Mother calmed down her emotions a little, frowned and thought for a moment. She definitely couldn't talk about what happened last night, so she said in a deep voice. Hongluan, how do you usually teach Su Buling? After a few days of contact with him, I found out that his intentions are not right. If a prince of a feudal lord does not correct him, he will harm tens of millions of people in the future. Why do you shoulder this important responsibility? Not interested. Mrs. Lu frowned when she heard this. She was extremely caring towards Su Buling, and she was almost demanding in everything from dressing up to words and deeds, and Su Buling never let her down. He was a dragon among people in every aspect, and he was a bit out of line when he was drunk last time. Seeing the Queen Mother suddenly accusing her precious little boy of evil intentions, Mrs. Lu naturally became dissatisfied. It is true that your child is a little impulsive and murderous, but his intentions have always been correct. Since he entered the capital, he has never harmed half of the people, and he has not been sexually attracted to women. How can he say that he has evil intentions? The Queen Mother was stunned. Not close to women? When I held her last night, her breathing was obviously a little heavier, and when the Queen Mother thought about it, she felt something strange was pressing against her butt again. She held her hands tightly and said coldly. He is just pretending in front of you. How can a man not be lewd? But a gentleman's love and affection are more than polite, and he must do it in a proper way. He. When Mrs. Lu heard this, she couldn't help but feel shocked. After all, the scene where Su Buling got drunk and bullied her under the quilt was still vivid in her mind. Queen Mother, did your daughter do anything outrageous when she was drunk in the palace last time? The Queen Mother did not dare to tell her about being bullied by Su Burang in bed last night. She just said with a cold face. No, he can do anything outrageous in front of me. I have studied Kimen gossip since I was a child, and I can read faces. Anyway, Su Buling has a bad intention, he has no bottom line in doing things, and he will bully weak women. People have the tendency to betray a gentleman. Mrs. Lu felt strange. She took a sip from the teacup and said, Your Majesty, the Prince of the Vassal, likes women, and as long as he waves, there will be beauties sent to the palace. Can he bully women? The Queen Mother had a lot to say but couldn't say it out. It was really uncomfortable to hold it in. Gritting his teeth and brewing for a moment, he suddenly got a little closer and whispered. Hongluan, I can tell from Su Buling's words and deeds that he may have some quirks and likes to touch women who cannot be touched. I came here today to remind you, lest you. Snap. The teacup fell to the floor. Mrs. Lu was shaken all over, frowned and said seriously, Xiao Xiang why are you speaking so openly? I have been observing the festival for many years after marrying into the Xiao family, but have there been any rumors at all? No. The Queen Mother gently shook her slender legs, and anxiously prepared her words. I'm not saying that you don't follow the rules of women, as the saying goes, be prepared for any danger. I just think that Su Bulenling's mind is not correct, and I want you to teach her well to avoid such a thing from happening. Think about it, his son with a different surname is Wang, and he is not related to you, but he calls you aunt verbally. What if he has evil intentions that day? It's not like this kind of thing has never happened in the prince's family. How many children from aristocratic families get together with their aunts and nannies in Kuishao Street? If this happens, I'm afraid you, the Lu family, will have to come here to break off the engagement and ask you to remarry. Spit. Mrs. Lu's face turned red with annoyance, and she glared at the Queen Mother fiercely. Xiao, have you gone crazy after holding it in the palace for too long? The princess and I are like sisters. You, get out of here. The Queen Mother suffered from the disadvantage of being mute. Seeing that she could not understand the explanation, she could only say coldly, I am kindly reminding you that if you are not able to discipline me, I will help you discipline me. You will be a good person and I will be a bad person. Is this okay? If you really have a good mind, you will naturally have a clear conscience. Mrs. Lu's chest heaved. After being angry for a moment, she shook her head. Your child is definitely not a person with evil intentions. I don't need you to discipline me. I have my own sense of discretion. The Queen Mother was helpless. Knowing that Mrs. Lu's heart was focused on Su Buling, it was impossible to believe that Su Buling would do what she did last night. She could only restrain her emotions slightly at the moment. I am Su Buling's elder after all. I can always meet him, right? You ask him to go to Changal Palace in the afternoon, and I give him some instructions. It is also for his own good. Excessive favoritism and pampering are not a good thing. Many emperors do destroyed on this. Mrs. Lu frowned, Your Majesty won't go. How come he doesn't go when you tell him to? Doesn't he even listen to you? Or do you think I'm so lenient and don't let him come to my place? This sentence hit Mrs. Lu's weakness perfectly, and she was unable to refute it. After a little hesitation, he had no choice but to nod. How is it possible? I'll talk to him this afternoon. The Queen Mother was smart and understood Mrs. Lu's character, so she immediately said. If he doesn't come, he means he doesn't even want to listen to you. If that's the case, I will send a letter to King Su and we will take care of him together from now on. There's no way your daughter won't listen to me, just don't worry, Your Majesty. The Queen Mother was satisfied. After chatting with Mrs. Lu for a while, she got up and returned to the Xiao family mansion. Mrs. Lu sat in the room for a while. Although she didn't believe the Queen Mother's nonsense, she was still a little anxious in her heart. What if the Queen Mother really saw that something was wrong with your child? Thinking of this, Mrs. Lu recalled the scenes of New Year's Eve, and her eyes showed a bit of embarrassment. After thinking for a while, she stood up and walked to the embroidery bed, took out the belly band that was placed together with the rice paper from under the pillow, hesitated for a moment, and then made up her mind to crumple it into a ball, and threw it directly out of the back window facing the lake, and then hurried out of the villa to find Su Buling. The breeze blew slowly across the lake, bringing circles of ripples. The thin white dress fell from the window, drifting with the wind and flying a distance. When it was about to fall into the water, a back figure flashed across the lake. Not long after, in the quiet alley outside Jinghua Garden, Su Buling, who put the belly band back, stood under the eaves with a frown on his face, looking at another peony belly band in his hand, with mixed feelings in his eyes. The thin moon-white belly band was made the same as the previous one, the only difference was that the peony flowers on it were goose yellow, dotted with a few green leaves. Under the gentle sunlight, the silky fabric woven from silk was slightly shiny, and the pattern on it was very familiar. Su Buling raised his hand and gestured on the peony flower, and then used his fingers to pick it up. A series of thrilling scenes came to his mind, and he seemed to be able to feel the bulge in the palm of his hand that was under great pressure. Hiss! Su Buling slapped his forehead, leaned against the wall of the alley and closed his eyes for a long time, just feeling ashamed to face Aunt Lu again. Aunt Lu was conservative and caring for him very much. I don't know how much pressure she was under in her heart, so she pretended to be normal in front of him. I did something stupid, what should I do? Su Buling was entangled in the same place for a long time. After 2 lives, a relationship is not easy to come by. Although he had some strange ideas, he didn't want to hurt Aunt Lu anyway. Responsibility is always more important than desire. Since Aunt Lu pretended that nothing had happened, he could only pretend that he was drunk and didn't remember anything, so as not to embarrass Aunt Lu. As for the future, let's talk about it later. After a short rest, Su Buling folded the Yuebai belly band and put it in his purse, then turned and walked out of the city. Since he had just overheard the Queen Mother's words, he would definitely not go to the palace to die. If he didn't want to embarrass Madame Lu, then the rest of the thing was to hide. Anyway, the Queen Mother couldn't do anything to him, so he could hide for one day. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 132. Time flies, and the Lantern Festival is here in the blink of an eye. The city of Chang'an is decorated with lanterns and colorful lanterns, and activities including guessing lantern riddles are held everywhere. At dusk, there are few people in the bluestone alleys of Daifang. Most of the drinkers who often come to sit here have gone home to eat Lantern Festival. Shopkeeper Sun walked around the wine shop alone, wiping the tables, chairs, and benches. There are also 2 new lanterns added to the wine shop. Although the rough guys who come to drink usually don't pay attention to these things, they still have to be a little festive during the festival. Ding ding. While he was busy working, the sound of gold and iron colliding sounded from the alley, from far to near. Shopkeeper Sun is not a Jianghu person, but he has met a lot of Jianghu people from all over the country and has gained a lot of experience. Just from the sound alone, one could tell that it was an iron object that had hit the cloth bag. It was probably an iron gun that had been split into 2 pieces. The use of guns in the world is rare, and those who use iron guns are even rarer. Because iron guns are too heavy, weighing dozens of kilograms for a large iron rod, the killing power is huge, and the flexibility will be greatly reduced. If you encounter someone who is more flexible or stronger than yourself, the big one will definitely suffer. Shopkeeper Sun put the towel on his shoulders and looked up. Sure enough, it was Iron Spear Shuiyi and Wild Taoist Wu Yu who came. In the Bluestone Alley, Shuiyi and Wu Yu walked side by side. Wu Yu was nicknamed Wild Taoist just because he often dressed up as a fortune teller when traveling around the world, and was not a true Taoist. At this time, Wu Yu was wearing an ordinary martial artist's short fighting shirt and a bamboo hat on his head, covering half of his face. The same was true for Shuiyi. Shopkeeper Sun took a look, walked to the stove that was boiling water, picked up a jar of warm wine, and left. Wu Liadao, it's just the new year, why don't you start working without taking a break? Wu Yu held a sword in his thin hand, walked to the wine shop, sat down, put the sword on the table, and smiled warmly. You still have to live your life, how can you be as leisurely as Shopkeeper Sunday? Shuiyi de Ma Jin Dao sat down across the wine table and rubbed his calloused hands. I can't drink enough of this Duan Yu Shao. I don't know when I will come to the capital next time. Shopkeeper Sun, please tell me the truth. Do you have some good old wine hidden away? If so, give me Shuiyi a sip. My trip to Chang'an will not be in vain. Shopkeeper Sun shook his head and smiled, it's called running around the world after coming and going. Once this person drinks better wine, the current Duan Yu Shao will lose its taste, and he will be the one who suffers by then. So I say be content with what you have, just drink the wine that suits your taste. Don't think about better things all day long. You just can't bear to part with it. Alas, that's all. I'd better keep it as a gift for your son. I, Shuiyi, will be satisfied with my words. Shuiyi smiled brightly, took the warm wine jar from Shopkeeper Sun, poured a bowl for Wu Yu, and poured another bowl for himself. Shopkeeper Sun brought a plate of food to go with the wine, sat down at the wine table, and began to talk about the old events of drinking wine with influential figures in the world. On the other side, Su Buling sat fishing alone in the waterside pavilion of Qujiang Pond, thinking about future plans for several days. It's a pity that after thinking about it, there is no way out. The clues are blocked on the Emperor. Even if he breaks his face, he can't detoxify the poison on his body. He can only stretch his neck and wait for the knife. Su Buling was naturally angry, but after all, he was no longer the reckless and irritable character he used to be. The meaningless negative emotions could only be temporarily suppressed in his heart, waiting patiently for the next clue to appear. Over the past few days, some trivial news came to my ears. The Criminal Investigation Department began to search for Daio's top 10 warriors in full swing, but before the official list was finalized, Zhang Xiang of the Criminal Investigation Department also used a poisonous trick. First, a few gangsters who have been wandering around the world for many years and have never been brought to justice will be included in the list of the top 10 warriors, and the list will be announced to the world and they will be notified to come and receive their awards. If it's not convenient for you to come here, it's okay for someone else to come with your head and help you pick it up. He was given a golden plaque by the emperor, was born as a jinchi, and received a huge bounty from bandits, and later became famous throughout the world. This news is undoubtedly a powerful aphrodisiac, thrown into a pool of stagnant rivers and lakes. Countless Jianghu people who dreamed of reaching the sky in one step went out with their swords in hand. Even if you can't really enter the top 10 in the world, you will have no regrets in this life if you sit in the top 10 for a few days. Anyway, a charlatan with an innocent background can admit defeat if he can't beat him. Why should he be afraid of beating up a drowned dog? As for Kuishao Street, the news coming from there was a bit of a headache for Su Buletinling. After the Queen Mother heard that he was missing that afternoon, she became very angry like an innocent woman who had been defrauded of money and sex. She actually ran to the current emperor and suggested that she should be his guardian in the future. Naturally, Songji didn't know the reason. When he asked the reason, the Queen Mother couldn't give any explanation, so she had to give up. Aunt Lu was naturally angry when she heard the news, and the two started to quarrel. One is the daughter-in-law of the Xiao family, and the other is the daughter of the Xiao family. Strictly speaking, it is a household matter. Prime Minister Xiao's first wife ran out to say good things to both sides, and finally hung Xiaoting up and beat her up, so that the Queen Mother and Mrs. Lu calmed down. Xiaoting. The reason why Xiaoting was beaten was that no one outside knew the inside story. Even Mrs. Lu thought that the Queen Mother had been holding back in the palace for a long time. Seeing that she had a sensible son and nephew accompanying her, she felt jealous and deliberately looked for trouble to show off her temper. Then it was easy to solve this matter. Mrs. Xiao directly brought back Xiaoting, who had been idle all day long, and ordered Xiaoting to go to the palace every day to accompany the Queen Mother to relieve her boredom. The Queen Mother had no explanation at all and couldn't find the culprit. She could only vent her anger on her unfulfilled nephew and force Xiaoting to find someone. If he couldn't find someone, Xiaoting was stewed. Xiaoting. After hearing the news, Su Buling knew that the Queen Mother was still angry, so he would not run back to die. It was none of his business to stew Xiaoting. When the Queen Mother was almost angry about bullying Xiaoting, it would not be too late to find a chance to apologize. Qujiang Lake was as smooth as a mirror. Su Buling stayed with the fishing rod for a few days. It was a bit boring to do nothing. He couldn't help but miss the happy fruit Xiao Manzi. He hadn't seen Zhu Manzi since the end of the year, and according to the news from Lao Ba, Ning Qingyi's injury was almost healed, and he was probably ready to leave. Su Buling thought for a moment, then put away the fishing gear, disguised himself a little, and secretly returned to Chang'an City alone. I failed to advance, and it seems that I have stopped pushing. Please give me a recommendation vote. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gongzi. Chapter 133. Under the full moon, lanterns filled the streets and alleys. On the streets near Hutai Street, all kinds of people walked among women and girls holding lanterns, and there were also street vendors selling handmade scabbards, leggings, and other items. Zhu Manzi, disguised as a lantern girl, carried a bamboo basket with several lanterns in it, walked and stopped in the bustling crowd. Her eyes always stayed on a man in front of her, keeping a sufficient distance. Zhu Manzi was a wolf guard after all, and it was impossible for her to hang out with Ning Qingyi every day. She still had to go to work. In recent days, the secret agents of the investigation department reported that a team of foreign envoys who entered Beijing before the new year was a little strange. The team that called themselves Beixia Kingdom envoys were all proficient in elegant language. Although Dao's national strength made foreign countries scramble to imitate it, it was not to the point where anyone could speak the same language. Only people from the martial arts world who often traveled around would learn these to cover up their accents. Secondly, except for a few officials who acted like envoys, the other followers were basically a mess. Every night, a few people ran out of the Siyi Pavilion to hang out in gambling houses and brothels. They spoke a lot of jargon and black language, which was more familiar than most people in the underworld. After the investigation department learned about this situation, it sent people to track down Hu Yanjia, the leader of the envoy team. Because Zhu Manzi looked well behaved and looked like an ordinary girl, and she was also a wolf guard of the Tianzi camp, the task of stalking naturally fell on her. Several teams of wolf guards of the Tianzi camp were ready to support at any time nearby. After a few days, there was finally some gain. This afternoon, Hu Yanjia suddenly left the Siyi Pavilion alone, saying that he was going out for a walk and didn't let the court officials follow him. After that, he went to an inn, changed into the clothes of the underworld people and came to the vicinity of Hutai Street. Zhu Manzi knew that there would be gains today, and followed Hu Yanjia to the vicinity of Renai Hall. Renai Hall is located in a remote and sparsely populated area. It is the place where martial artists gather in Hutai Street. It is considered a public place, and whoever uses it must clear it. Today, the disciples of the Iron Wire boxing gym were guarding nearby. It was obvious that something was going on inside, and the security was tight. Zhu Manzi didn't dare to follow him in, and after a little thought, he turned around and ran back, looking for a master in the government office to solve the matter. In the afternoon, Su Buling rode a fast horse back to Chang'an City and went directly to the old courtyard where Ning Qingyi lived. The courtyard located in the deep streets and alleys was originally an idle and deserted courtyard of the owner. Su Buling placed Ning Qingyi here, so as not to cause unnecessary trouble, so he asked Lao Xiao to secretly buy the courtyard early. Because of the sparse population, the alley is not much different from before the New Year, and there are only a few doors with couplets and New Year pictures. The horses have stepped on the bluestone pavement and stopped outside the old courtyard. Su Buling turned over and got off the horse. Before he raised his hand to knock on the door, he heard the sound of ta-ta-ta from inside. Obviously, he heard the movement of the horse's hooves and ran over to open the door in a hurry. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, but did not do anything more. He stood outside the door holding the reins and said with a smile, "Miss Ning is so anxious, is she missing me?" In the old courtyard, the footsteps paused for a moment, and soon resumed as before. The courtyard door opened with a creaking sound, and Ning Qingyi appeared, wearing black clothes and a bamboo hat. Because the martial arts uniform was tight, his legs were straight, and his chest was naturally more eye-catching than when he was wearing a loose fox fur. Su Buling glanced up and down naturally and nodded with satisfaction. Ning Qingyi saw this look, his face became colder and he showed some displeasure. "Mr. Su, if you continue to be so rude, our friendship will end." Su Buling laughed and looked around the yard. "Where is my manzi?" Ning Qingyi walked out and closed the door. "Mr. Su arranged someone to monitor the two of us, why ask when you know the answer?" It seems that Ning Qingyi has discovered the 7th and 8th who were secretly following him. Su Buling walked in the alley with his horse, and said casually, "Miss, don't think too much, I'm just worried that something might happen to you. Last time, Manzi was surrounded and killed outside the city. If I hadn't sent someone to follow, we would have been in big trouble." Ning Qingyi had some experience in the martial arts world, and knew that Su Buling would not trust others easily, so he didn't care about this. He hesitated for a while with his sword in hand. Mr. Su, I have been in Chang'an for more than 2 months. I can't protect my enemies if I am not strong enough. I have to go back and practice hard for a few years. I can't stay in Chang'an for long. Su Buling knew what she was going to say, and shook his head and sighed. As the saying goes, it takes 500 glances in the previous life to get a chance to pass by each other in this life. It's a pity that we finally met and shared life and death together, and now we are separated like this. The words were a bit corny, but it was a pity that Ning Qingyi didn't understand the meaning at all. Frowning and thinking seriously, he tilted his head slightly. Is there such a saying? Why did you keep looking back at me in your previous life? Su Buling blinked. Well, don't be so absolute, maybe Miss Ning looked back at me in her previous life. Ning Qingyi shook his head. When walking in the world, it is basic to keep an eye on all directions and listen to all directions. Looking back at people is a taboo, which will attract the other party's attention. How can I make the same mistake 500 times? Su Buling pondered for a moment, and gave up the idea of flirting with this female knight who has nothing to do except her beauty. His tone became more serious. When are you leaving? I met an old acquaintance in the world a few days ago. He wanted to make a sale recently and asked me to join him. I agreed and I will leave after I'm done. Su Buling raised his eyebrows. What deal? Do you want my help? Ning Qingyi shook his head. The Jianghu has its own rules, and things may not be exposed. You are from the court, so I can't take you there. Su Buling spread his hands. I am from Ziliang, and have nothing to do with the court. I have killed Zhang Xiang with you, and you still don't believe me. Ning Qingyi was stunned, and after thinking about it for a while, it really made sense. I guarantee people, which is related to the reputation of the Jianghu. If it can't be done, we will leave. If you break the rules by relying on your status, I will not be able to travel the Jianghu in the future. Su Buling nodded. If you believe me, I will naturally believe you. I am the most disciplined person. I will follow you to see. If something goes wrong, someone has to protect the girl. Ning Qingyi took a deep breath and looked away. As Ning Qingyi walked and stopped, he came to the market near Hutai Street. It was just getting dark, and there were many people on the street. In addition to various street vendors, there were also Jianghu performers, opera troupes, juggling stalls, etc. Ning Qingyi walked around the street twice, but the man still hadn't come. He felt a little embarrassed. Maybe he will come later, or maybe not. Most people in the martial arts world are cautious and will run away when they sense any disturbance. Su Buling tilted his head slightly. It's okay anyway. If your martial arts friend doesn't come, I'll just accompany you shopping. Ning Qingyi stood there with the sword in hand, and suddenly felt a little strange. From childhood to adulthood, he spent most of his time in the Taoist temple. He used to walk alone in the martial arts world. Suddenly, he followed a man with bad intentions around the street. It felt like a tryst between a scholar and a lady. Thinking of this, Ning Qingyi subconsciously distanced himself a little, looked around, and didn't know what he was looking at. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guangong Zi. Chapter 134. When Su Buling came, he had already thrown the wind-chasing horse aside, and also dressed in black clothes and holding a sword to dress like a man of the world. Seeing that Ning Qingyi ignored him coldly, he didn't say much, and just watched the juggling stall to perform. Waiting for someone was boring, and the two of them stayed together with nothing to say, so the atmosphere was naturally a bit wrong. Ning Qingyi consciously brought Su Buling here, so he should be the host and should not ignore the guest. After a moment of silence, she glanced at the street and saw a fortune teller's stall, so she started to talk. Mr. Su, have you ever had your fortune told? Su Buling blinked, a little puzzled. Why do you suddenly ask this? Mr. Su just said, I looked back 500 times in my previous life, and only got to pass by you in this life. Did the fortune teller tell you about your past life experience? Su Buling looked at Ning Qingyi, who was serious and a little curious, smiled helplessly, and walked towards the fortune teller's stall in the distance. I have never had my fortune told before, and I don't know how good these half-immortals are. I happen to be on business tonight, how about a fortune teller? Ning Qingyi didn't know what to do, so he followed Su Buling. There were many people on the street. A small table was placed on the street. It was covered with yellow cloth embroidered with the Bagua diagram. A fortune-telling basket was placed on the table. There was also a banner next to it. On the banner was written, "The fortune of marriage is calculated. Be content and know your fate, so you don't worry." She looked quite like a fairy. Su Buling walked up to the table, but he didn't see the old Taoist priest with a white beard. Behind the small table was a small girl with pigtails. She was wearing a small floral skirt and holding a candied hose in her hand. She was shouting in a childish voice. "Calculate the fortune of marriage, calculate the fortune, get married, and break the ground for the house." The pigtail girl was very small. She couldn't touch the ground with her feet when she sat on the chair. Her two cloth shoes were dangling in the air. Her big eyes were full of spirit and cuteness. Such a small girl was fortune-telling, so naturally there were no customers. It was obvious that she was helping the adults to look after the stall. Next to the fortune-telling stall, a woman wearing a headscarf sat on a small stool, spreading a piece of cloth on the bluestone floor, with stones pressing down the four corners. On it were more than a dozen furs, fox fur, bear fur, etc., which were not of good quality, and ordinary people in the world could only afford this. The woman should be the mother of the girl with pigtails. In the intervals between bargaining with the customers who were looking at the goods, she scolded from time to time. "Xiao Dehua, sit down honestly and don't shout nonsense, don't be ashamed." The little girl laughed and was very disobedient. She still swung her cloth shoes and shouted. "Calculate marriage, calculate good and bad luck." Su Buling looked at it and laughed. He was about to leave, but he stopped at this time, walked to the opposite side of the fortune-telling stall and sat down, and said seriously, "Little Taoist priest, are you accurate in fortune-telling?" Ning Qingyi thought Su Buling was a little childish, and stood beside him with a sword, pretending not to know him. At the fortune-telling stall, Xiao Dehua stopped laughing when she saw that there was a real customer. She blinked her big eyes, hid the candied hose under the table, and secretly looked at her mother. The woman was tidying up the fur that was messed up by the customer, turned her head and said softly, "Young man, this little girl is just helping to look after the stall, how can she tell fortunes? You can go find someone else." Her voice was cheerful, and it was obvious that she often traveled around, and she didn't have as many shyness and taboos as the women in the market. Su Buling chuckled, "There is no one who can tell fortunes in the world. It doesn't matter who you ask." The woman was amused when she heard this. "Xiao Dehua, this brother wants you to tell his fortune, you tell him and say something nice." "Okay, okay." Xiao Dehua was immediately happy when her mother allowed it. She inserted the candied hose into the gap between the tables, put her hands on the table, and looked up at Su Buling. "My uncle is very accurate in fortune-telling. He taught me, and I can tell it accurately too. What does Big Brother want to tell?" Su Buling sat opposite in a formal manner, put on a sad face, and sighed. "I don't know. How about you, Taoist priest, tell me what I want to tell." Xiao Dehua blinked her eyes, looked at Su Buling, then looked at the cold Ning Qingyi next to her, grinning and said, "I know, Big Brother wants to tell me my marriage." "Yeah." Su Buling nodded with satisfaction and gave a thumbs up. Little Taoist priest is really advanced, he can see it at a glance. "Then you can tell me my marriage." Xiao Dehua rubbed her hands, picked up the fortune stick basket and handed it to Su Buling. "Big brother, shake it for a while." Su Buling took the fortune stick basket and shook it seriously for a while, and a bamboo stick fell on the table. Xiao Dehua picked it up in a serious manner, touched her chin and looked at it for a while, then made a surprised expression. "Ah, ah, ah, a very good fortune." Puff dash. Even Ning Qingyi, who was not worldly, was amused and looked at the street with his lips covered. Su Buling pretended to be surprised and leaned forward a little. "Really? Little Taoist priest, please don't lie to me. When can I get married?" Xiao Dehua took the bamboo stick and carefully recalled what the elders said every day before she began to interpret the fortune. Coral, pearls and jade are bound by fate, and the color becomes more vivid when the luck comes. Sometimes the trapped dragon is touched by the rain, and there is no worry about the road to the sky. Well, it means that the young master is about to get married, and the person he is going to marry is right in front of him. Ning Qingyi finally came to his senses, his smile disappeared, and he glared at Su Buling coldly. Sometimes the trapped dragon is touched by the rain, and there is no worry about the road to the sky. Su Buling nodded with satisfaction, took out a silver ingot from his sleeve and put it on the table. "Then I'll borrow the Taoist's good words." Xiao Dehua looked at the large ingot of silver ingots and was obviously stunned for a moment, then pursed her lips and hesitated. The woman squatting next to her showed a bit of surprise in her eyes and said, "Xiao Dehua, why don't you thank the young master quickly?" Xiao Dehua opened her mouth, but did not reach out to take the silver, but muttered a little embarrassedly. "Big brother, I'm talking nonsense, I can't tell fortunes, I can't take your silver, you can come tomorrow, my uncle is very accurate in fortune telling." Su Buling put down the silver. "Whether the calculation is accurate depends on the customer, I think it is quite accurate." Xiao Dehua shook her head. "Uncle said that you have to rely on your ability to earn money when you travel around the world, and you can't take it if it's not yours." I really can't tell fortunes, I'm talking nonsense." The woman wanted to speak, but when she saw Xiao Dehua say this, she laughed and didn't answer. Su Buling raised his eyebrows and put the silver on the table. "Okay, I'll pay the deposit first and come over tomorrow to tell another fortune. Is that okay?" Xiao Dehua then smiled, took the silver ingot with both hands and held it in her palm, giggling, "Don't worry, big brother, my uncle is very accurate in fortune telling, and he will not refuse to pay." While talking, Ning Qingyi saw a figure walking from the end of the street and turning into a small alley. Her face became more serious. "Mr. Su, let's go." Su Buling felt a little unsatisfied, so he stood up and followed Ning Qingyi to the alley. "See you tomorrow, big brother." "Okay." Su Buling took a few steps and looked back, but saw that the girl with pigtails was putting the silver ingot to her mouth and wanted to bite it. When she saw him turn around, she quickly put it down and showed a silly smile. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 135. Whirl. The night wind was silent, and the long road was dark. There were several piles of sundries in the dark alley behind Huatai Street, and the noise from the street was barely audible here. Su Buling and Ning Qingyi walked deep into the alley with long swords in hand. Because of their special identities, they had covered their faces and their eyes with hats. Ning Qingyi stopped in the alley, looked around, and said, "Come out." Tap. At the corner of the alley ahead, two figures with black clothes and masks came out. They were tall and wearing wide cloaks, and it was impossible to tell whether they were men or women. One of them had a scimitar hanging under his cloak. Dressing up like this to do business, it was naturally because their identities could not be exposed. "Who is he?" Of the two people on the other side, Zhongli Chuchu, who was in disguise, asked first. Ning Qingyi relaxed his vigilance a little, walked closer and said casually, "My friend, trustworthy." Zhongli Chuchu nodded, while Hu Yanjia next to him was more cautious. This time, the transaction was in Chang'an, where people were unfamiliar with the place. Ning Qingyi had a grudge against the detective department, so he could be trusted, but the people Ning Qingyi brought were not necessarily reliable. Miss Ning, we trust you, but you should know the rules of doing things in the underworld. Please tell me about this brother's background. Su Buling was stunned when he heard the voice, and recalled that this was the foreign bastard he met when he accompanied Aunt Lu to Bai Rouge last time. I thought he was here to do something big, but I didn't expect it to be a fight between chickens. Su Buling was too lazy to introduce himself, and he stomped his knees on the ground and rushed out. Hu Yanjia and Zhongli Chuchu's faces changed suddenly, thinking that Ning Qingyi brought people to kill them, and the two reached for the weapons in their hands without hesitation. Zhongli Chuchu is good at using poison and has good light skills, but he is not good at single combat. After flipping his palm slightly and sprinkling out a handful of poison needles, his figure retreated rapidly. Huanji didn't want to fight to the death with someone whose identity he didn't know. Seeing that there was a trick here, he grabbed the scimitar in his right hand and wanted to fight and retreat. Unfortunately, the two reacted too slowly. Su Buling flew out, and the long sword on his waist came out of the sheath with a clang, bringing a chilling cold light in the dim alley. Ding ding ding, under the dancing sword light, a few sparks burst in the air, and the black poison needles that ordinary people could hardly detect were swept onto the wall next to him. Su Buling's momentum did not decrease. Before Huanji pulled out the scimitar, he came in front of the two. Zhongli Chuchu's green eyes showed surprise and fear, and he raised his arms to block without caring. Huanji pulled out the scimitar and slashed forward, but his heart was chilled to the bottom of the valley. After all, this was too fast, and they were not opponents of the same level at all. Stop, Ning Qingyi's face was pale, but he only had time to spit out two words. The sword flashed through, so fast that only a shadow remained. Hu Yanjia slashed at the air, and Zhongli Chuchu closed her eyes in despair. The two of them only took half a step back and froze in place. Su Buling landed behind the two of them, made a sword flower, slowly put the bright sword back into the scabbard, tilted his head and revealed his beautiful peach blossom eyes. Xiaoning, your two friends are not very good. Ding dang. The sound of the scimitar falling to the ground woke up Zhongli Chuchu, who was pale. She felt it a little and found that there was no pain on her body. She looked down and saw that there was a hole in the clothes around her waist, but only one layer was broken, and the lining inside was intact. Hu Yanjia didn't dare to breathe, and watched the hat on his forehead fall off in one piece. The cut was smooth. If he moved forward a little, his crown would be gone. Ning Qingyi's eyes widened, his expression was a little strange, and after thinking for a while, he walked up with a sword in hand. He is my friend, you can rest assured. What can Hu Yanjia say? Whoever has the bigger fist is the leader in the martial arts world. It's useless to worry about him if the other party kills him like killing a chicken. Zhongli Chuchu's face also became a little serious. Knowing that she had met a martial arts master, she thought for a while and said, "Sir, you are good at martial arts. May I ask your name?" Su Buling didn't speak on the street last time, so he was not afraid that the other party would hear his voice. He said casually, "Su Shan Shan, people give me the nickname Eagle Finger Sanren, the girl has beautiful eyes. I am Zhongli Chuchu." Zhongli Chuchu felt that this young man was a little proactive. Foreign women were not as shy as those in the Central Plains. She thought for a while and prepared to take off the black veil. But Ning Qingyi knew Su Buling's nature, and coughed lightly, "Don't waste time, Master Su is busy with affairs and has no time to stay with us for too long." Hearing this, Zhongli Chuchu had to give up the idea of getting to know him, and followed Ning Qingyi to Renai Hall. Renai Hall is the place where the 12 martial arts halls in Hutai Street meet. When they need it, the Jianghu will also book it. During the Lantern Festival, the outside is decorated with lights and colors, but the inside of Renai building is very quiet. The disciples of Taixian Boxing Hall surrounded the area around Renai building tightly, and there were people holding knives at the entrances of the alleys on all sides. Occasionally, when someone came, the manager would check their identity, and only those with acquaintances could enter with a guarantee. At night, the lights in Renai Hall were brightly lit, and half of the 12 armchairs were occupied, and there were also many people standing. Some were dressed in ordinary clothes, and some covered their faces because it was inconvenient to show their faces. As more and more people came in, there was some noise in the lobby, and everyone was discussing who was gathering people and who they were going to deal with. On the 12 chairs, the leader was Yang Ping, the head of the Iron Wire Boxing Gym. His fists were famous for their ruthlessness in Chang'an City. When he was young, he wandered around the world and killed many people, but he was not caught by the government. After that, he worked in Chang'an for decades under an assumed name, and he was considered to be clean. This time, Yang Ping came to collect the money and take charge of security. Yang Ping held the purple clay teapot and waited for a while. Before everyone arrived, he turned his head to look at the two men in bamboo hats next to him and chuckled. All the people who came are acquaintances, no need to hide. The wild Taoist Wu Yu, who had a long sword at his side, said in a flat voice, "With such a big show, it must be a big deal. We should be more vigilant." Yang Ping had dealt with Wu Yu before and was familiar with each other. Seeing that Wu Yu and Shui Yi did not show their true faces, he did not say anything more. There are basically few clean people in the martial arts world. Wu Yu and Shui Yi were originally 3 brothers. Once when they were helping someone with something, they ran into Chen Daizai from Wudang and lost one of them. As far as Yang Ping knows, Wu Yu avenged his brother and went to Wudang Mountain alone to kill several Taoists before leaving. Chen Daizai, the Wudang killer, chased him for 300 miles but failed to catch him. I dare not comment on how good his martial arts are, but his lightness skills are definitely top-notch. Because Wudang has a good relationship with the court, Wu Yu and Shui Yi are afraid of being retaliated against, so they rarely show up in the martial arts world since then. This time, it was the owner of Yingchunlu who contacted them and invited these 2 masters. As for the other martial arts guests who were sitting there, they must have done something shameful in secret. Even Ning Yi, who had not yet arrived, was a fierce bandit who secretly killed Zhang Xiang in Chang'an City. As time went on, a few traces of impatience appeared in the quiet lobby, and Ning Yi, who came late and embarrassed, finally entered the lobby. The disciples outside closed the door. Although there were 30 or 40 people standing in the brightly lit lobby, it still looked a bit deserted and gloomy. Ning Yi was also somewhat famous in the martial arts world. He had a chair in the lobby. Su Buling and Zhongli Chuchu were his followers and could only stand behind Ning Yi. Zhongli Chuchu wanted to say something several times on the way here, obviously interested in the martial arts warrior from the Central Plains next to him, but it was not easy to speak because of the wrong occasion. Hu Yanjia knew his own weight. At this time, his mind was full of thoughts of following the big boss to gain experience, so he stood silently at the back. Yang Ping glanced and saw that all the people he had contacted were there, and said, "Everyone is here, let's start. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 136. As everyone arrived and took their seats, 4th Master Chen opened the curtain at the back of the lobby and walked to the center of the lobby. He clasped his fists at the dozens of people present and said in a deep voice, "Today, I, Chen Laozi, am sitting in the bank. All friends in the world who can trust me are here to give me Chen Laozi face. You may have heard of my reputation, Chen Laozi. What you can say depends on money, and what you can't say depends on your money. My son, I wouldn't be able to utter a single word even if my head fell off. If it weren't for this, I wouldn't be alive today. Everyone present nodded, and a few people said a few compliments. Su Buletinling held his sword and listened quietly. It was his first time to participate in a Jianghu gathering. In fact, it was still a bit fresh, so he nodded along in a decent manner. After Chen Ziyi finished speaking, he sat down on an imperial chair and said, "When traveling in the world, you must remember the words life and death, wealth and honor are determined by heaven. I have called you here today, and of course there is a job. But not everyone dares to take it, so I have to say a few words first. If you can't accept it, go out and stay in a restaurant for a few nights. I, Chen Laozi, will be the host. I will serve you delicious food and drink. I will leave after everything is done. I hope you don't worry too much. It's all old rules. Even if fourth master doesn't mention it, we know it. Rules are rules, no matter how old you are, you have to say them." After Mr. Chen finished explaining the rules carefully, he paused for a moment and then said in a deep voice, "This time there is a risk of life. If you see blood, you have to rest for a while. Whether you have a life flower or not depends on you. Brothers who don't want to take it can go out. There is basically no stable job in the world of Jianghu. To point it out directly is to say that this job will definitely kill someone, so don't touch it if you care about your life. Bloody selling and buying means killing. Most Jianghu people make a living by escorting smuggling merchants, serving as guards, robbing and stealing things, etc. There are only a few who actually accept money to kill people. There is also a difference in the sale and purchase of killings. The court basically ignores the secret killings of Jianghu people, but the investigation of killings of common people is very strict. The killing of officials is equivalent to rebellion, and the intensity of the government's investigation after the incident is different. What Chen Ziyi obviously meant was that this time he paid for the murder, and the person killed was either rich or noble, and would be hunted down afterwards. After hearing this, most of the 12 Taishi chairs stood up, and almost all those standing behind them left. Yang Ping also shook his head. Chang'an City is under the emperor's feet, and wolf guards are everywhere. I have a family and can't do it, so I will wait outside. After saying this, he stood up. Ning Qingyi didn't like the idea of getting paid to kill people, and was about to leave, but a hand pressed her shoulder. She looked back and said nothing more. Soon there were less than 10 people left in Nyohal Hall, and without exception they were all capable people. Wu Yu and Shui Yi were in a group, Su Buling was in a group of 4, and 3 Jianghu people were also together, all with their faces covered. Fourth Master Chen knew the basics of the leaders Ning Qingyi, Wu Yu, and the 3 Jianghu Ke. After thinking that there was no problem, he raised his hand. "You are all old acquaintances. Sit down. I, Chen Laozi, only know so much. I will let the host decide the rest." After saying this, he stood up and walked out of Renai Hall. In order to prevent the information about the benefactor from being leaked, the area around Renai Hall was cleared. All the disciples from the Iron Line sect were guarding the surrounding streets and alleys, and no one was allowed to approach. Those who are still in the lobby are all gangsters who have killed officials or are wanted by the court. They each sit on the Grand Master's chair without saying a word, making the Hall of Nyoda seem a bit depressing. Su Buling sat between Ning Qingyi and Zhongli Chuchu, also secretly thinking about who to kill. Tap tap tap. After waiting for a while, footsteps sounded from the back of the lobby. Several minions struggled to carry a large box out and put it down in the center of the lobby. After opening it, there were neatly placed silver ingots, a total of 10 boxes. Several people present obviously sat up a little straighter, and even Ning Qingyi squinted her eyes slightly, obviously not expecting the master to be so generous. After all the boxes were placed in the lobby, a man who looked like a master came out from behind the curtain, followed by two swordsmen. He walked steadily and with a restrained look. He was obviously a master of martial arts. The master walked to the center of the hall, looked at the Jianghu people who were all wearing bamboo hats and masked their faces, and said, "I called you here today to help my master kill someone. There are 5,000 taels of silver in the box, one box for each person. After the completion of the matter, there will be 5,000 taels left, which is enough for you to live the rest of your life safely. If you don't want to carry it with you, if you don't leave, you can exchange it for an official ticket." After a moment of silence, a charlatan spoke. "The reward for a tycoon who commits a major crime in the world is only 10,000 taels of silver. 100,000 taels of silver for marrying the emperor's head." Everyone present basically had the same idea. After all, it was too much and it would be hot to hold. The master shook his head and clasped his fists in the direction of the imperial city. "How noble the Holy One is today, even 100,000 taels of silver can't even enter the palace gate. The person he wants to kill this time is definitely not a common man, and he will be tortured endlessly afterwards. You should think about it first. If you want to quit after hearing the news, it will be too late." The two swordsmen stood behind the crowd, their eyes so murderous that Hu Yanjia felt guilty. If Su Buling hadn't been here, he would have backed down. After waiting for a while, the master saw that everyone was watching silently, with no intention of letting go. He nodded, took out a portrait from his arms, and said, "Have you ever heard of the reputation of dragon sinew, tiger bone, and unicorn strength? Su Buling?" "Ning Qingyi." Ning Qingyi's eyes changed from cold to cute in an instant, and she tilted her head slightly, as if she was wondering if she heard wrong. Su Buling took a breath, picked up the teacup and wanted to take a sip, but found that his face was covered, so he put it down again. Hu Yanjia has been traveling all over the country for many years, so he naturally knows something about the Su family, which almost destroyed Baiyu, and he said, "I've heard that Su Buling, Prince Su's son, is nicknamed the Little King of Hell. He is a cruel and capricious man, with more than 100 lives on his hands, and his martial arts skills are unfathomable." Shuiyi and Wu Yu both frowned, obviously feeling a little troubled. Zhongli Chuchu thought carefully for a moment. "I heard that the man named Su Buling has done many evil things in his life, bullying men and dominating women, and he especially likes married women." The master looked a little confused. Where did the girl get the news? Zhongli Chuchu blinked, "The storyteller on the street." The master thought about it for a moment. He was asking a killer to kill people anyway, so there was no need to clarify. He nodded immediately. Su Buling had a violent character. He killed countless people in his life, bullied men and women, and caused many families to be destroyed. Back then, when Iron Eagle was hunting deer, the imperial court sent troops to purge the rivers and lakes. Ziliang soldiers and horses were the first to bear the brunt, and many sects and families were wiped out. He has long been guilty. It's a pity that the Su family is so powerful that no one can get close to me. I invite you all to come here to get rid of this serious problem. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 137. Zhongli Chuchu thought for a moment. "I heard that the villain was infected with the dragon locking goo, and his martial arts skills were all gone and he became a cripple. Isn't it a bit of an exaggeration to call so many people? Be prepared. As long as Su Buling can be killed, no matter what method is used, all the silver will belong to you." The master glanced at everyone. "You have heard what I said. There are more than 100 thugs outside. If you retreat in the face of battle, you can't leave." The 9 people sitting there were silent and looked at each other for a few times. Wu Yu tapped the table with his fingers and thought for a while. "Wealth and honor are sought in danger. Since I am here, I will try to kill the emperor. There must be brave men under heavy rewards." The three Jianghu guests were originally wanted bandits by the court. With the silver in front of them, they nodded after a little hesitation. The master glanced around and cast his eyes on Ning Qingyi and his group who had not yet expressed their opinions. The two swordsmen also pressed the handles of their swords. If you don't leave when you are asked to leave, you will sit here and listen to the news. If you don't agree, it will be too late to leave. What could Ning Qingyi do? She could only turn her eyes to the male friend beside her. Su Buling frowned and said, "Can I take a look at the portrait?" The master nodded and spread out the paper. On the paper was a very handsome man with peach blossom eyes and diamond-shaped eyebrows, and a rather fierce expression. Zhongli Chuchu was stunned. He looked a little familiar. Isn't this the weak scholar she met on the street last time? She was about to ask, when she saw Su Daxia, one of her accomplices, stood up and walked to the portrait. The master thought it was dark and couldn't see clearly, so he handed the portrait over. Su Buling took the paper and looked at it carefully. This man. Then he put the paper in front of his head and pulled down the black cloth covering his face. Why does this man look so much like me? The Jianghu people present compared carefully and nodded slightly. They really look alike. Zhongli Chuchu and Huanji were stunned in place, as if they were trying to figure out the current situation. The master tilted his head to look at them for a few times. After a little confusion, his face turned into shock, gradually turned pale, and he raised his hand with a slight tremor. Su Buling, why are you here? Su Buling was too lazy to pay attention to the master. He held the paper and looked at everyone sitting there. He shook the paper and looked at them with a defiant look. Since you want to kill me, then stop talking nonsense and start. Many Jianghu people pressed their weapons, a little confused. Although Su Buling didn't know why he ran into a gathering that was planning to assassinate him, these people had already agreed to the plan to assassinate him, so there was no need to explain anything. Snap! A sword flashed in the hall of Nyo Hall. The long sword was like a white snake spitting out its tongue, sweeping across the neck of a Jianghu person. The splashing blood beads finally woke everyone up. The two swordsmen drew their swords and rushed up at the same time. Wu Yu and Shui Yi knew that something was wrong and stood up to escape. Ning Qingyi drew his sword, while Huanji and Zhongli Chuchu reacted quickly. After figuring out the situation, they stood up without hesitation and stabbed the Jianghu on the left and right with their scimitars and daggers. The hall of Nyotang was instantly transformed into a Shura field. Kill! In the Renai hall, the people sitting there suddenly stood up at the same time, and the swords and shadows filled the entire hall in an instant under the candle light. The master had already reacted. The person who must be killed was right in front of him. It was useless to think more. If he killed Su Buling today, he could exchange his life for his life. If he didn't kill him, the Li family would be finished. Kill him, and all the silver will be yours. The master urged repeatedly. The two swordsmen were originally the retainers of the Li family. They were also the leaders in the assassination of Su Buling this time. Seeing that the real owner was here, they went to double-team Su Buling without any hesitation. Cha! Ding ding! The sound of metal clashing continued, and sparks burst out in the hall. The Jianghu people, including Wu Yu, originally planned to flee at the risk of a fight, but the other party had already started to attack. At this time, when it was too late to escape, they joined the melee without hesitation. The two unknown Jianghu people were furious because their brother was killed. They swung copper hammers and broadswords at Su Buling frantically. Su Buling faced the joint attack of the two people alone with a bright sword. The Jianghu people holding the octagonal hammer smashed Su Buling's head with the force of splitting the mountain, forcing Su Buling to raise the sword to block or retreat. The man holding the broadsword used a lying sword. He turned over and rolled on the ground. The blade cut his feet in 3 directions, making it difficult for Su Buling to stabilize his lower body. The sword was light and agile, and it was difficult to confront the heavy hammer and broadsword head-on. All the people present were good players, and they didn't need to be reminded by others to find opportunities. The two swordsmen of the Li family did not miss this God-given opportunity. They rushed directly to the back of Su Buling, blocking all the exits, and tried to kill Su Buling with a joint attack. Ah! The man holding the octagonal copper hammer was all knotted up, and the round hammer smashed down with such force that the stone tablet might be smashed to pieces. Su Buling seemed a little weak with his sword alone. Ning Qingyi, who had stood up, was about to help Zhongli Chuchu, who was at a disadvantage. He saw Su Buling in a deadly situation and thought it was not good. He raised his sword and stabbed the two swordsmen of Li Mansion without hesitation. Just a second later, Ning Qingyi, with a sharp look in his eyes, was stunned. The octagonal copper hammer smashed down brazenly, and Su Buling didn't even dodge. He watched helplessly as the copper hammer was about to hit his head, and there was a dull bang sound, and the stone floor of the lobby cracked instantly. Looking up, he saw Su Buling raised his left hand and directly grabbed the hammer that was smashed down. The Jianghu man holding the copper hammer hit the towering tree with the hammer. The heavy hammer in his hand stopped abruptly and could not move forward even a little bit. However, the opponent did not even shake, and his eyes showed horror. Snap! With a flash of sword light, the two forearms separated from the body. The Jianghu man holding the puteo on the ground wanted to raise his sword to block, but he did not raise the puteo that had been with him for many years. He looked down subconsciously and saw that the puteo was stepped on the ground by a boot. In the fight of life and death, it is a taboo to take your eyes away from the opponent. At the moment when his eyes moved down, the Jianghu man had already secretly thought that it was not good. He wanted to throw away the sword and retreat, but it was still too late. As soon as the puteo Jianghu man's eyes touched the pair of white boots, his neck felt cold, and then his vision was lifted up, the world began to spin, and the chaotic battlefield below and the dome of the lobby appeared alternately. When he landed, he saw his back for the first time in his life, and a column of blood rushed up from his headless body. Ah! The armless Jianghu retreated backwards with a scream, but the sword pierced his throat again, turning it into a low roar. Su Buling's boots swept the ground fiercely, and the puteo on the ground turned into a sharp arrow and flew to the side of the hall. The two swordsmen in the back just approached and saw the two Jianghu were killed on the spot, and their eyes were full of disbelief. But now there is no chance to think at all, so they can only bite the bullet and draw their swords to meet Su Buling, who wanted to turn around and kill him, and Ning Qingyi, who came to support him. Please give me some recommendation votes. I'm struggling to death. I don't know if the weekly recommendation can exceed 10,000, /U003E, /U003C. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 138. Compared to Su Buling and Ning Qingyi's killing of chickens, Hu Yanjia and Zhongli Chuchu were obviously much more unlucky. Wu Yu and Shui Yi were masters who had been famous in the martial arts world for a long time. The requirements of the Li family for recruiting assassins this time were extremely high. Chen Ziyi went to great lengths to ask the owner of Yingchunlu to help contact them, and only then did he find the two brothers, who were much more experienced than the three martial artists. It is true that Hu Yanjia and Zhongli Chuchu have some reputation in the mud pond martial arts world of Nanyu, but they are still young after all, and their experience and martial arts are not as good as Wu Yu and Shui Yi. Zhongli Chuchu is nicknamed Blue-Eyed Scorpion and is only good at assassination and poison, and is powerless in a head-on duel. At this time, Shui Yi's two iron spears had been clicked together into a 2-foot-long spear, and a sweep across the hall of Nyotang directly smashed the armchair where Zhongli Chuchu was sitting. Wu Yu soared into the air, and the long sword in his hand was like a black snake, silently stabbing Hu Yanjia's throat. Huanji made the first move, and his scimitar slashed towards Wu Yu's neck. Halfway through, the sword tip was already in front of him, frightening him so much that his hair stood on end, and he quickly turned his head to dodge. Zhongli Chuchu's short dagger was no match for Shui Yi's iron spear, so she could only dodge. In the gap between the broken chairs, she saw that Huangji was unable to resist, so she threw out several poison needles in her hand and stabbed Wu Yu's neck to help. SSSSS. The slight sound of breaking wind was barely audible in the hall where the sound of metal clashing continued. Shui Yi shouted, "Be careful." Wu Yu's ears moved slightly, and the long sword in his right hand scraped a bloody wound on Huangji's shoulder. He swung his left sleeve violently, and actually caught the flying poison needles in it, and then threw them back. The 3 poison needles returned along the same path and shot towards Zhongli Chuchu at an astonishing speed. Zhongli Chuchu didn't expect that her opponent was so strong. Shui Yi's iron spear had already stabbed at her. It was obviously impossible to dodge both of them. She had an antidote for her poison needles, so she could only ignore the flying poison needles and forcefully use her dagger to block the stabbing iron spear. Ah! Shui Yi's eyes were fierce. Facing a rookie like Zhongli Chuchu, he didn't even need to use all his strength to kill her. How could a mere dagger block the iron spear in his hand? He roared and picked up the dagger, stabbing the spearhead into Zhongli Chuchu's chest. Zhongli Chuchu couldn't dodge in time, and Huangji couldn't save himself. Seeing that he was about to die, he couldn't help but show some despair in his eyes. At this moment, a broadsword flew over with a terrifying sound of breaking wind, and chopped Shui Yi who was stabbing with a spear. The blade spun like a windmill fan blade, with great force. If it hit, the body and head would be separated. Shui Yi felt a chill in his heart, and raised his iron spear to block the side without turning his head. Ding! A crisp sound that made the ears numb appeared in the lobby. Shui Yi had raised his gun to block hastily, and the force in his hand caused him to stagger to the side for 2 steps, his face suddenly pale. Snap! The sound of poison needles entering the flesh was heard, and the 3 poison needles shot from behind Shui Yi to Zhongli Chuchu, because Shui Yi was displaced by the impact, just pierced into Shui Yi's back and shoulders. Second brother. Wu Yu's face changed drastically, and after kicking Huangji away, he quickly put away his sword and turned to rush towards Shui Yi. Zhongli Chuchu took the opportunity to retreat to the wall, and was delighted to see this, and said in a delicate voice, "Kill him first." Then, the poison needles and flying knives were thrown at the 2 of them. Su Buling and Ning Qingyi teamed up to kill the 2 swordsmen, and turned around and rushed towards Wu Yu and Shui Yi. Shui Yi was pierced by a needle in the shoulder, and his muscles stiffened and he quickly lost consciousness. He waved his gun to block the flying knives and poison needles, and ran towards the window with all his strength. Wu Yu didn't dare to fight, so he grabbed Shui Yi's arm and wanted to escape with his brothers. Unfortunately, Renai Hall was not protected from eavesdroppers, and the windows were sealed, with only one main door for people to enter and exit. It was not easy to reach the main door when 2 people were fighting 4 people with a wounded man who was unable to move. On the night of the Lantern Festival, in the streets near Renai Hall, martial arts disciples holding weapons patrolled back and forth. 4th Master Chen stood in the alley with his hands gathered in his sleeves, looking up at the full moon in the sky. Yang Ping took a sip of tea from the purple clay teapot, and looked back in the direction of Renai Hall, a little curious. Wu Yu, Shui Yi, Ning Qingyi, and the 3 brothers of the Hu family, they have found so many masters, they are not really going to kill the emperor, right? Master Chen sighed, "In my line of work, I ask what I should ask, and don't ask what I shouldn't ask, and say what I should say, and don't say what I shouldn't say. If they really kill the emperor, it can only be considered my bad luck. With these guys, they can't even get into the palace gate." Yang Ping couldn't deny it, looking at the disciples patrolling back and forth. Just when he wanted to talk about the 10 Wu Kuei, his ears suddenly moved. Swish swish swish. The sound of footsteps that was barely audible came from not far away, from all directions. Yang Ping's face changed, and several disciples with good hearing also noticed it and raised their weapons. Chen Ziyi frowned and raised his hand. Be patient. Yang Ping carefully observed the surroundings, raised his hand to let his disciples put down their weapons, and then a deep voice sounded from behind. Chen Ziyi is very polite. Yang Ping and Chen Ziyi turned around and suddenly found that 12 wolf guards stood on the wall behind them, all with bronze plagues, one of whom was Zhang Tingbao, the leader of Tianwei camp. The 12 people did not move at all, wearing black wolf guards and hanging goose feather knives on their waists, just like 12 impermanences that suddenly appeared. Seeing the sudden visit of 4 teams of Tianzi camp wolf guards, the martial arts disciples around hurriedly put down their weapons. Yang Ping also put away his vigilant look, turned into panic, and hurriedly bowed his hands and clasped his fists. Greetings to General Zhang. Chen Ziyi's face was slightly gloomy and hesitant. Tap tap tap. Footsteps came from the alley. Chen Ziyi thought that the chief officer of the investigation department had also come, and his face became more cautious. Turning his head to look, he saw a little girl running over panting, holding a bamboo basket with colorful lanterns in her hand. She walked a few steps and rested her hands on her hips. The disciples in the martial arts school were confused. They thought it was a lamp vendor on the street who was intruding, and they raised their hands to drive away. The little girl took out a bright yellow sign from her arms and waved it as she walked. I am also a wolf guard. The disciples of the martial arts school were blank-eyed, and the tense atmosphere in the alley suddenly became weird. Zhang Tingbao, the leader of Tianwei camp, frowned. The momentum he had finally put on was gone. He jumped down from the wall, held the Yanling knife in his hand and walked to Mr. Chen. He looked at the buildings behind. Working on something. Fourth Master Chen's smile was a little stiff. He looked at the 13 Tianzi camp wolf guards standing in the alley, cupped his hands and said, Zhang Shui, you know the rules, don't embarrass me. Zhang Tingbao held the Yanling knife in his hand and looked down at the two of them. Chang'an City is at the feet of the emperor. Only the court can tell the rules. Don't impose the rules on me. Fourth Master Chen frowned slightly but did not give way. Hutai Street was assigned by the imperial court to Wuxing. It is governed by 12 museum owners. They have always been law-abiding. Zhang Tingbao spat on the ground, his eyes getting colder. I am also a martial artist, how about we show my real skills? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 139. Seeing that his tone was wrong, Yang Ping quickly apologized and said, Shui Zhang, you guys are just trying to make ends meet. If you want to investigate the case, just name them and they will be sent to the Yamen for you. We will never show any favoritism. Zhang Tingbao frowned. If he was caught by a thief, he pretended to be an envoy and involved the diplomatic relations between the two countries. It was possible that the enemy's spies were exchanging information. Otherwise, it would not have been possible for so many wolf guards to follow the investigation. The following Hu Yanja came to Renai Hall. We must find out what the purpose is. Thinking of this, Zhang Tingbao raised his hand and asked the wolf guards to forcefully enter and inspect. Fourth Master Chen and Yang Ping couldn't talk about it, so they didn't say anything more. Putting the wolf guard into Renai Hall would ruin their reputation for life. At the moment, we can only prepare to block. Fighting with the wolf guards will definitely alarm the guests inside. Whether they can escape depends on their luck. This is the rule. When traveling around the world, they always have their lives tied to their belts. And just when the wolf guard was about to forcefully break through the obstruction, a loud clang sound suddenly came from the building behind. There were all warriors present, and the sound of the collision of iron weapons could be heard with great force. It was obvious that a conflict had occurred. Fourth Master Chen's expression changed and he looked back at Renai Hall. Apparently he didn't understand why the three groups of people, who had no grudges and no grudges, suddenly started fighting. Zhang Tingbao was also a little confused. He let go of the handle of the Yanling knife and snorted. What? Are you also following the example of Bama village and having a cage fight to the death? Fourth Master Chen was hesitant. According to the rules, no one could come close to listen until matters in Renai Hall were discussed. If anyone messes around, they will be killed by more than 100 people outside. This has never happened before. Zhang Tingbao raised his hand, bypassed Fourth Master Chen, and led the wolf guard into the alley. Zhu Manzi was a little scared. He wanted to stand outside and wait, but he was surrounded by people from the martial arts school. It seemed inappropriate to stand here. He could only walk at the back of the wolf guard with a basket and turn around if something went wrong. Running posture. Kill. Second brother. Zhang Tingbao walked forward quickly, but before he reached the vicinity, the sound of fighting inside reached his ears, and he immediately said loudly. The wolf guard is doing business, who is having a private fight in the capital. As soon as the words came out, the closed door of Renai Hall became obviously quiet. Zhang Tingbao thought that the Jianghu people inside knew what was going on, so he put down his weapon and waited for inspection, so he took a few steps forward. Unexpectedly, before he could reach the door, two doors collapsed and a strong man carrying an iron gun hit them. He came out, jumped up high and hit Zhang Tingbao with a gun, and said angrily, "Walk." Naturally, these words were not shouted to Zhang Tingbao. As the tower-like man crashed out, a black shadow followed him, climbed onto the roof like a ghost, and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The Yanling sword on Zhang Tingbao's waist came out of its sheath with a clang, blocking the iron gun that was thrown down. He was hit and took 3 steps back. There was a bit of shock in his eyes. He did not expect that the Jianghu guest in the room was so fierce. Outside Renai Hall, swords were drawn one after another, and all the wolf guards rushed forward to meet the enemy. At the collapsed gate, 4 more people rushed out, also masked and wearing bamboo hats, dressed like Jianghu people. The more than 10 wolf guards did not dare to underestimate them and immediately focused their main force on the 4 of them. Shui Yi forced Zhang Tingbao back with one shot and spat out a mouthful of black blood. Taking advantage of the wolf guard's separation, he swept away the few people in front of him like crazy, then ran towards the courtyard wall and fled in the opposite direction of Wu Yu. The 4 wolf guards split up and chased the fleeing Wu Yu and Shui Yi, while the others rushed towards the remaining 4 with knives. At this moment, among the latest 4 people to rush out, the first man holding a sword pointed the sword blade in the direction of the thief's escape. "Chase, don't let anyone get away." The voice was calm, with a hint of the unquestionable air of being in a position of superiority for a long time. The wolf guard obviously did not expect this situation, and 2 people actually turned around despite the order, but they immediately reacted, holding knives and glaring angrily, with expressions on their faces. "Who the hell are you?" Zhu Manzi, who was following behind, his eyes lit up when he heard the sound, and he hurriedly ran up and raised his hand. "Stop, everyone, stop. We are one of our own." The wolf guard stopped when he heard this, obviously a little confused. Only then did Su Buling remember that he was covering his face. He raised his hand to pull off the scarf and ordered again, "Someone is planning to assassinate me. Go after him." After that, he looked at Ning Qingyi and said, "You should go after him too." Ning Qingyi and Zhongli Chuchu both couldn't see the light. They didn't hesitate at all when they heard this, and they jumped up the courtyard wall and left Renai Hall. As the leader of Tianwei Battalion, Zhang Tingbao naturally recognized Su Buling and thought it was the palace guards who did not stop him. After ordering the wolf guards to chase the 2 fleeing thieves, he stepped forward and bowed. "Shizishija, why are you here?" Su Buling actually wanted to know why he was here. He still hadn't figured out how he could take the job over to him when he followed Neng Qingyi out to travel around the world. However, it is a fact that someone planned to assassinate him. It is better to find out in advance than to be assassinated. Su Buling was holding the long sword dripping with blood, and the cold poison in his chest had begun to bite back. He did not suppress it anymore, coughed violently a few times, and then fell forward. Ah! Zhu Manzi was originally full of excitement, but was frightened when he saw Su Buling fainting. He hurriedly stepped forward and hugged Su Buling, struggling to support his shaky body. Zhang Tingbao's expression changed suddenly. He had brought people out to investigate a small case. If Prince Su died in front of his eyes, he would definitely be dragged away to be buried with him. Now he was ready to scold her. After taking out the communication fireworks from his waist and firing them, he hurriedly stepped forward to help Su Buling and turned around and said angrily, "How dare you plot to assassinate the Lord's son?" Snap! Messaging fireworks exploded in mid-air. Fourth Master Chen had met Su Buling once, and when he heard that the Li family secretly summoned assassins to deal with Prince Su, his face turned ashen. He knew that the person the Li family was trying to kill was definitely a powerful person, but he didn't expect him to be so powerful. He was accused of killing everyone. Was the Li family crazy? Yang Ping knelt directly on the ground and said urgently, "Zhang Shui, I'm just doing things according to the rules. I don't know anything about it, so please be patient." Su Buling leaned against Zhu Manzi with a green face, and raised his hand to stop Zhang Tingbao from being accountable. Because Mr. Chen knew the details of Neng Qingyi, he immediately pulled out the carrots and brought them out of the mud, and then said, "They don't know. The person who paid for the murder is still in the hall. Let's go and investigate." Fourth Master Chen had a quick mind and understood the meaning immediately after hearing the words. The Li family definitely couldn't hold it back. No matter how strict the rules were, they were not as important as the lives of the whole family. He quickly raised his hands and said, "I didn't know it beforehand. It was someone summoned by the Li family on Kuishao Street. I just thought it was a escort business, so I asked Shi Zhuang to be accommodating." Zhang Tingbao's face changed slightly when he heard this, and he said solemnly, "How dare Marquis Zhonyang attack King Su? Don't talk nonsense. If you tell lies, I am willing to be cut into pieces with 1,000 knives." The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 140. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The wheels rolled over the flat street, and dozens of wolf guards guarded the surrounding area. There was some medicinal smell in the carriage. Su Buling was lying on the carriage with a pale face and a hot towel on his head, looking like he was about to die soon. After coming out of Renai Hall, Su Buling closed his eyes and fainted, leaving all the remaining matters to the court to deal with. As an intelligence department, the detective division delivers information very quickly. After the surrounding Wolf Guard officers and soldiers arrived, the news spread throughout the city at an extremely fast speed. The Li family on Kuishao Street secretly hired an assassin to assassinate Prince Su. Prince Su learned the news and pursued the case. He fought with the assassin in the Renai building on Hutai Street and was seriously injured and fell into a coma. It's self-evident how shocking this news is. The winter before last, Su Buling went to Beijing and was assassinated and disappeared in the Weihe River area. After King Su learned the news, he used the excuse of changing defenses to strengthen troops in the territory under his jurisdiction and mobilize the northwest troops to the southeast. Lu Pinjiang's eldest son Lu Chang'an, who commanded the Western Army, did not dare to take off his armor for nearly half a month. Fortunately, in the end, Lao Xiao appeared outside Chang'an city with Su Buling on his back. Although he was poisoned, he was unscathed, and the matter calmed down. Although today's matter is not as thrilling as the year before, Su Buling could still be assassinated under the emperor's nose. The assassin was still the Li family, who was loyal to the Song family, which is not easy to explain. Almost half an hour after the deadly fight in Renai Hall, the news had reached the imperial study room. And Li Beiyi reacted quickly. When there was a riot on Hutai Street, he took out a concubine, ran to the palace gate, knelt down, and cried out to plead guilty, saying that Li Tianlu died. He did such a treacherous thing. Everyone knows that Li Beiyi is talking nonsense. How can a 14-year-old or 15-year-old concubine have the courage to pay for a murder? Li Tianlu was Li Beiyi's beloved son, and only Li Beiyi would do this. However, several generations of the Li family have been loyal to the Song family. Their ancestors even sacrificed their lives for Xiaozong, so avenging their son was justified. Su Buling was not dead, so killing him would definitely not be appropriate. But if he doesn't kill, King Su will definitely not agree. The knife is pointed at his son, and the murderer is still alive and kicking. How can he safely let his son study in the capital? The reason Su Buling made himself miserable by coughing and fainting was because he wanted to see the emperor's reaction. As long as the emperor showed the slightest favor in dealing with the Li family, King Su might be able to take the opportunity to take him back from Chang'an City. But the chance is very slim. If he can leave Beijing so easily, it would be too childish. It is estimated that the Li family will be severely punished in the end to prevent King Su from taking the opportunity to take him away. Anyway, the Li family couldn't stay after they attacked him. As a victim, it would be best if Su Buling could fight for his return to the fiefdom. If not, he wouldn't suffer any loss if he watched the Li family die. Moreover, he can hide from the Queen Mother by pretending to be sick, so he naturally enjoys the benefits. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The carriage was temporarily found from Hutai Street. It was not very spacious and made some strange noises as it moved. Zhu Manzi, who was wearing a floral skirt, was lying next to her with tears in her big eyes. She held Su Buling's hands in her arms and kept whispering. Young Master Su has his own destiny, and everything will be fine for sure. If you promise to take me back to Ziliang, you will definitely do what you say. Zhu Manzi didn't understand the situation and thought that Su Buling was really assassinated and beaten half to death, so he was naturally anxious and afraid. But she doesn't have medical skills and her status is not high, so she has no choice but to stay here with her. It must be okay, it must be okay, I'll be at the prince's mansion soon. I don't know how long it took, but Zhu Manzi was crying and talking when his face suddenly stiffened and his voice stopped. Just now, why did I feel like I was pinched just now? Zhu Manzi raised his eyes and glanced at Su Buling, his face was still pale and unconscious. Looking down, he saw that the white palm he was holding was pressed against her skirt. Because his hand was relatively large, it just covered the right one. Zhu Manzi's face turned red. Only then did he react and wanted to push Su Buling's arm away. However, as soon as the idea came to his mind, he remembered that Su Buling had fainted. It must be unintentional, it's also possible that cramps. Zhu Manzi pursed his lips and looked around a few times. Because the carriage was small, there were no outsiders, so he didn't push Su Buling's hand away. He just stayed by the side with some blushing and said nothing. I didn't want to pay attention to these unintentional touches, but Su Bulenling's palms were a little warm. Through the fabric of my clothes, I seemed to be able to feel the lines on my palms. Zhu Manzi's face turned redder and redder, and he muttered secretly, "Don't think blindly. Mr. Su is unconscious and helping to take care of Mr. Su. How can you think so?" Before I could suppress my words, the hand on my clothes moved again. It seemed like an unintentional movement, but it happened to be very. Zhu Manzi is a young man with a carefree temper. He has never thought about the relationship between men and women. There is no way to describe how he feels now. I just felt that my heart was beating very fast, my face was frighteningly hot, and it was even a little difficult to breathe. Su, Mr. Su. Zhu Manzi suppressed his messy thoughts and called out calmly. Su Buling lay half dead, looking like he might die at any time, without any reaction. Zhu Manzi blinked his eyes, looked down at the slightly changed shape of his clothes, and shook his head secretly. There must be something wrong with his luck. How could Mr. Su, such an upright and aloof person, have unclean thoughts? Thinking of this, Zhu Manzi took a breath and pretended not to care about these unintentional contacts, but in just half a quarter of an hour, there was a sound of breathing that was rapid and slow in the carriage, and I tried my best to suppress it. Zhu Manzi's face was flushed with a hint of aura, beads of sweat hung on his forehead, and his lower lip was almost bitten, but he still tried to endure it as if nothing had happened. But he couldn't hide his body's reaction, his eyes were watery, and he pursed his lips in discomfort. Su, Mr. Su. Zhu Manzi called out again, but when there was no response, he thought about pushing Su Buling's hand away. It's just that this push didn't push it. Zhu Manzi frowned, a little confused, but his newly clear mind was soon disturbed again. Somewhat unsupported, she lay down on the couch, her embroidered shoes rubbing against each other, and her hands subconsciously wanted to reach for her skirt, but she forced herself to take them back. Woo! Not long after, Zhu Manzi couldn't hold it anymore. He clutched Su Buling's sleeve tightly, his breathing became faster and faster, and he was on the verge of collapse. Then, Su Bulenling stopped. The dizzy Xiao Manzi breathed lightly, opened his eyes in a daze, and looked down. His hands stopped moving. Well. Su Buling frowned and his eyelashes trembled a few times, as if he was awake but not awake. Zhu Manzi finally reacted and hurriedly sat up straight. However, the feeling in her heart made the girl of cardamom age look a little weird, a bit like disappointment, but also like she was confused. The hand in his arms was withdrawn, feeling a little empty. Su Buling raised his hand and rubbed his forehead, slowly opened his eyes, and looked around confusedly. I was there. The voice was weak and feeble. Zhu Manzi's face turned red, and he wiped the sweat on his face with the hem of his sleeves, put on his usual cute and charming smile, and said softly. Mr. Su, are you awake? Su Buring sat up on the couch, his expression as calm and cold as ever. Manzi, why are you here? How long have I been sleeping? Tuerjiang asked me to take care of the young master. I fell asleep not long ago and we are almost at the palace. Zhu Manzi replied with some embarrassment, then stood up, patted her skirt, picked up the vermilion wine gourd from the side, and handed it to Su Buling with a smile. Su Buling leaned against the car window, opened the wine cork and took a big sip, looking at Zhu Manzi. Manzi, why is your face red? Do you have a fever? No. It's a little hot in the car. Zhu Manzi responded with evasive eyes, then sat down on the stool next to him and changed the topic. Is Mr. Su okay? Su Bulenling sighed with a somewhat helpless look. You can hold on, the cold poison has been suppressed. Zhu Manzi said looked around worriedly, and thought for a moment, why is the young master in Renai Hall today? I don't know. I had nothing to do at home, so I went out to follow Xiao Ning to pick up jobs, and ended up getting it on my head. Why did you come to Renai Hall? As he spoke, Su Buling raised his hand to straighten Zhu Manzi's somewhat messy collar, like a brother who cared about his sister. At this time, Zhu Manzi had suppressed the feeling of being unable to get up and down, and smiled. I checked the case, and it was an envoy from a foreign country, who happened to follow Renai Hall. Unfortunately, he didn't find it, and there was no body inside, I'm afraid. He ran away a long time ago. Su Buring nodded and chuckled, what a coincidence. Zhu Manzi blinked his big eyes. For some reason, he always felt that he couldn't be as generous as before. He thought about it secretly for a long time and found a topic to talk about. I heard that the imperial court is going to select 10 military leaders. Mr. Su should be one of them, right? Su Buring curled his lips and gestured to his body. I'm already like this, why should I be a military leader? Let's talk about it later. Young master is so powerful. When the poison is gone, I will definitely be the best in the world. Then I will be your bodyguard. The best guard in the world. It sounds very powerful. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, agreeing with this statement. After only a few words, the carriage stopped, Prince Su's mansion arrived, and Lao Xiao was waiting outside the door. Zhu Manzi had already been restless and felt that his heart was in a mess. At this time, he stood up and nodded slightly. We're at the place. I'll go back first. Xiao Ning must have cooked and waited for me. If I go back late, I'll be gone. Go ahead and find you in a few days. Well, master, take care of yourself. Zhu Manzi blushed again, bowed and got out of the carriage, then turned back with the wolf guard. After walking a few steps, he looked back, then looked down again.